And now everyone, please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to your host, Ann Russell.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I just want to say thank you so much for getting up so early to come to our panel. And thank you to all of you joining us online as well. Again, my name is Ann Russell. I'm the program director for the Film Production MFA program here on campus. And we are hosting this session entitled Documentary and Activist Filmmaking. Please put your hands together and help me welcome our panelists. We have story producer Ricardo Ramos, mixer and sound editor Frank Scheuring, and director, producer, and cinematographer Jeff Unay. Let's give a round of applause. Awesome. So since some of the people might not know about your backgrounds and how it's related, if you guys would mind just going through and telling me a little bit about what your work has been and also which program you graduated and when you graduated. We'll start with you, Ricardo.
Cool. Hey, guys. Good morning. I graduated from film in 2012. And then, long story short, I decided to stay an extra year and do my master's in entertainment business because I was in the middle of a documentary, which we'll talk about later today. So I decided to stay an extra year to finish working on the documentary, do my master's, and mature a little bit before moving to LA. I've been in LA for 3.5 years. I currently work as a story producer in nonfiction, which can be anything from docuseries, game shows, celebrity reality shows.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I graduated in 2001, and I spent the first, 15 years or so of my career working on television documentaries for National Geographic, Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, PBS, people like that, a lot of nature stuff. Also a number of independent documentary films. And in fact, right now I'm working on one with this guy.
And Frank, which program did you graduate from?
Oh, sorry, recording arts. Yeah.
I am Jeff Unay. I graduated from computer animation in 2002. I think that's right, 2002, 2003. And yes, I make nonfiction films now. It's just kind of this crazy whirlwind of unexpected events, and I love it.
Awesome. So let me start off with this because we have you're all from a different program, and obviously here at Full Sail in the film program the emphasis is on narrative filmmaking. Can you each tell me a little bit about how you got involved in documentary or activist or non-scripted series?
I think for me it all started with my documentary class. I had a very inspiring instructor, Jim Martin. He's an Emmy-winning producer-director. And I was just so captivated, and I always have these ideas for projects, but they don't necessarily have to be narrative. They can be done in documentary form. So while I was in school, I did a couple of little short documentaries for different nonprofits. And then, like I said, I started doing an independent documentary. I'm from Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, which is in the border with El Paso, Texas. So just real quick, I started doing, I thought it was really important to cover innocent victims of the devastating drug violence that we went through. But anyway, I started working on that as a side project. I got a lot of help from students, from faculty, a lot of people believed in the project. And that's also what led it to my passion in non-scripted, because it's very similar. Basically, a docuseries is a documentary split in 8 episodes, 10 episodes. So that's kind of the backstory of how I got involved and attracted to the genre.
And Ricardo, was that a short or was that a long form? Did you as a feature?
The documentary, which is titled Vicissitude, if any of you guys want to check it out, it's on Vimeo, and my Vimeo account is on the app on my profile. It's a feature. It's a little over 50 minutes. It was originally going to be a short, but we had a lot of amazing, interesting content, so we decided to make it a feature.
Awesome. Great. And Frank, how about you? How did you get involved?
Well, I kind of, I don't want to say lucked into it, but I watched a lot of like Discovery Channel shows and stuff like that. In fact, my wife would get annoyed at how much I was watching them, and like even when I was at school here, and I discovered that where I live, where I grew up, outside of Washington, D.C., that's where Discovery Channel is, and that's where National Geographic is, and that's where PBS National is, and I was like, all right. So I went there, and it just happened to be like, they're pretty much, if you work in production or post in the DC area, you're working for these people.
Yeah.
You know? And at the time, people around them were working. Now they do a lot of stuff in-house. But so I started doing that there, and through doing their stuff, you know, people would either see my name or the company name or whatever, and then I would get to work on independent films, you know, documentaries, and yeah, so it just kind of just happened, really. But I'm glad it did, you know, because it was like, I loved watching that stuff.
Yeah. And Jeff, how about for you?
How did I get into documentary? Interesting. So I was working in the visual effects industry for a number of years. Finished some big blockbuster films at Wedded Digital, things like King Kong and Avatar. And when I was done with Avatar, I had an opportunity to come back to the States, to Seattle is where I live. I've been living there for 7 years. And as soon as I landed in Seattle, I just found that as I was, you know, like a character modeler, I started building a lot of tools, and I started doing a lot of Python scripting, and I just thought, wait a minute, I'm an artist. I've always been an artist, and now I'm going through this like big, crazy kind of technical artist path, just because I can build tools that automate a lot of different processes and character development stages. And at some point, I was building scripts and tools, and I just stopped and said, screw this, I'm gonna go buy a camera. I'm an artist, I'm not gonna do any more of that. And so I bought a 5D, and this is, you know, somewhere in the beginning of the whole Canon 5D revolution. And I just started shooting stuff because I was really inspired by what that image was. You know, for the first time, I'd be able to afford a camera that had an image that really inspired me. You know, before it was just like camcorder look, you know, it looks like a video camera. Now it looked like film to me, you know, so it had a really rich, had really rich colors. So I ended up falling into film just because I was crazy about the imagery of it, and started shooting stuff. And before you know it, I'm working at Valve, which is where I've been working for 7 years. They knew I was shooting a lot of video with my 5D, and they asked me to cover the first ever $1 million video game tournament. And I thought, okay, well, it'll be a nice little highlight reel, you know, maybe 20-minute highlight reel of the tournament. Fast forward 2.5 years, it was a feature film. It was Valve's first ever feature that I had, was in the beginning stages of. Started that project with a handful of folks. And yeah, after Free-to-Play, that film launched, decided to continue working on my own nonfiction films and just doing that during the evenings and on the weekends. Yeah, and then here we are, you know, with this film that I've been working on for 3.5 years. That's supported by some amazing film institutes. I wouldn't have been able to predict my path to it. I'm a firm believer in listening to the things that inspire me as an artist, and just moving forward and putting all the logical brain, you know, aside, and just kind of moving forward toward, you know, my passions, because and those things change. It just never fails, you know, when you really honestly truly listen to yourself and what inspires you. That's kind of the long story of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And so, what's just because you talked about it, what is the name of the film, and what's it about, this feature?
Yeah. So we have some pretty big announcements coming up with my film. It's called The Cage Fighter. I've been shooting for 3.5 years, or 420 hours, 145 or 146 shoot days. So that film's going to be. So we have a world premiere coming up pretty soon, so we'll be able to announce that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, excuse me. Let's talk a little bit about inspiration. You're directing now, and you know, both of you guys working in projects. How do you go about sort of figuring out when, you know, whether the idea that you have for something is actually relevant enough to become a film? Is there enough information? And what's your process for that?
Relevant enough. It always ends up for me coming back to, it all really depends. That's a long.
It's okay.
Why is it relevant? Yeah, like why in the world would you spend 3.5 years shooting 400 and something hours on this? A lot of it ends up coming down to the folks that you're working with, the folks that are the subjects of the film, and if you have a really strong, healthy relationships with these folks, and they're truly, honestly opening their lives to you, and you're opening their lives to them. I think, in documentary and nonfiction, what you see on that screen is a clear reflection of the relationship between the subject and the filmmaker. If people on the screen are guarded, I'm going to bet the filmmaker's guarded from his subjects. If you give your all, I think it's infectious when you as a filmmaker give your all. And when I say your all, not like your best filmmaking work. I mean like you as a human being. If you give them you'll be able to also get that in return, and you'll see that on that screen.
Yeah, it's really about connecting with your subjects.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you do in an instance when you have a subject that you're interviewing, both of you guys, and they're either guarded or they're lacking the eloquence to be able to articulate what they're, what you're trying to get them to say, something that they're like in an interview? How would you say you deal with that, Ricardo?
Well, you have to remember the nature of the project. Like in the case of my documentary, it was a very delicate subject. We're talking about, again, innocent victims of the drug violence in the border of Mexico and El Paso, Texas. So I interviewed a lot of people who, went through a family member getting kidnapped, a death, their restaurants got burnt. So you have to treat this very delicately, and I think it's really important, empathy. And it's for anything you do artistic-wise, whether you're an actor, you're a director, you have to empathize and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So just always remember to do that no matter the art form you're making. I think it's really important, and sometimes people forget about it. It's not just about the technical things, empathy is highly important. So you just have to treat the subject delicately, be patient. If they're being guarded, just find ways to dig and go around different questions, and always do it respectfully. And I always remember that when I have to conduct my own interviews for reality shows or docuseries that I'm working on. So yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. A follow-up question to that: how long did you shoot for your documentary? How many hours did you end up doing for that?
It was really quick because I was still a student when we shot it. So we did 2 months of pre-pro while we were here, trying to figure out which students were going to help me. We set up a Kickstarter campaign to help pay for the plane tickets for everyone. And we did it during, I think, one of our summer breaks. And it was super quick. We only had 4 days. So I had the logistics were, bless my mother. Hey mom, I think you're watching. She was driving us around everywhere. Luckily I'm from the city, so through friends and contacts we were able to schedule the mayor of the city, entrepreneurs, business people.
In 4 days.
And we shot everything in 4 days. We had 12, 13-hour days just driving all over across El Paso and Juarez, and yeah.
That's incredible.
And then post took a year. Yeah, I took my time with it. That's another thing. Don't rush projects. Of course, there's deadlines, but I think it's really important to take your time with a project. Everyone kept asking me, "Where's the documentary? Where can we see it?" And I'm like, "Well, it's not ready. It's you know when it's ready." So it took a year, and now it's out in the world.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to come back to the question of the evolution of story in post versus production. But before we move on with that, Jeff, how do you handle the situation of that relationship with?
So if someone's guarded.
Yeah, someone's guarded, or even if I oftentimes found people just to be able to not quite it's like they didn't know what they were trying to say, and to
Right.
be able to help them, to guide them into articulating their feelings was a big part of.
Well, one of the things that I'm really interested about with documentary is it's really evolving as an art form. I mean, and that's one of the big reasons why I love working in this space, is because there's a lot of things that there's a lot of opportunities to be creative. I will say that, and so. So when I'm filming with someone, and if I notice that they're guarded and they don't really give great interviews, I won't interview them. I'll just follow them around and just try to understand what their daily life is like. And really, if they're guarded, really all that person's telling you is, I'm not ready to share with you. You know what I mean? That's what it comes down to. I'm not ready to share with you. And so you have to earn that trust. Those interviews, those amazing interviews that you see in documentaries, those are very much earned. And also, if someone's guarded, it's okay to stop filming that person. Okay, you can stop filming that person and move on to someone else that's going to be able to connect with you, depending on your deadline or whatever. But generally, if someone's guarded, and this is a project that I'm directing, producing, and a big part of funding, you move on, because it's really about working and shooting a subject that's going to open their life to you. If that person is willing to show that, then I'll go as far as I can, because I know this person's giving me their all, and I'll give them my all. If they're not, stop shooting them, move on to someone else.
Did you ever I always had a technique of, I would do I'd set the camera up, but I wouldn't really worry too much about, I would make sure it looked okay, but I wasn't really as concerned with it. It was just to get them used to the camera.
Yeah.
And then I would do I would just talk to them for hours just to get them used to it before I actually did the final, the one that I really wanted. Because you could almost lead people in kind of getting to what it is, delving into what you needed.
Right.
Once they'd articulated it, then when you came back to it the next day, or a week later, or even a month later, all of a sudden they could logically tell the story in a way. Did you ever do that?
Oh, absolutely. Again, that's all relationship building, right?
Yeah.
Just putting the camera down and talking. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that's critical. Again, it's just about being a human being. You're working with non-actors. People that are probably not used to being in front of a camera, so put that camera down and get to know them, and let them know a little bit about you, and your motivations, and it's just.
So then let's, Ricardo, tell me a little bit, because you've worked in reality, and Frank, you've worked in reality. Can you guys speak a little bit about the differences between sort of traditional documentary, or the documentary work you've done, and then, the reality, the reality work? Do you want to?
I feel like you haven't spoken that much.
No, I had something in my throat. I was passing it off.
No worries. Well, the thing is, in reality, it's just more structured. The structure's different. You have 8 episodes, 10 episodes, much more hours. Depends on the project.
Yeah.
Of footage. And then to differentiate between what would be, in my personal opinion, reality and docu-series. Reality, you have setups, you sometimes have to produce a little bit to get a story. Docu's more organic. You kind of let it, and I personally enjoy working on docu-series more because it's more rewarding. It's a lot more work, especially in post-production, because you have to look for those moments. You have longer hours of footage. And reality, it's a bit more structured. There's more setups, and reality TV shows, sometimes you're working with people that have experience in front of the camera. Whereas docu, that's not the case. but I think docus are more relatable. Like, for example, I worked on a show for a small network called FYI, docuseries, called Teenage Newlyweds. And to make the long story short, it's 3 couples from different states who get married, and they happen to be teenagers. These are not rushed marriages. They're not expecting a baby. And I learned so much. Like, I apply so many of those things to my own relationships. And that's what I love about working in docu, that you get immersed in these different worlds. And like, I could go on and on about shows that I've worked on, but just like you said, it's about being human and learning about different people and the things they do.
And Frank, how about for you?
Well, I think the biggest difference that I've seen in the stuff that I've done between reality and documentary is you have no time to do a reality show. No time. You know, and I've done, like, I'll give you the opposite ends. DC Cupcakes, which is like the most fluff, reality. And then Bomb Patrol Afghanistan, which is following guys in a war zone. Like, you can't get more opposite, But both of them, it's like quick. With the documentary, you can take your time, you can develop the story, and you can build relationships like he's talking about to get that comfort level or whatever. I actually just finished a documentary feature that we thought it was done a year ago, and we showed it here, and I'm like, man, it sucks. And so we recut it and changed it. So you don't have that luxury in reality, well, especially because reality is all broadcast. I don't think there's any reality that's coming out in another form other than broadcast. I could be wrong. Maybe there's some YouTube Red or Vimeo or something but I just don't know about it.
Yeah.
But when you're doing work for a network, it's here's the deadline.
Yeah.
Get this done,
Yeah, it's interesting. I always found that with reality, because it's your broadcast, you're basically pitching your stories to the networks long before you get into production. So you pitch these stories, you have this idea of what you're going out to get, but like any documentary, you have to be cognizant of what's happening around you, and you have to be able to read what's happening in the moment to get the real story. Because oftentimes, if you're somewhere shooting it and your story, I hate to use this example, but I worked on Hogan Knows Best, and we were supposed to do this fluff thing with them, and then they ended up having a marital fight, and if we hadn't been paying attention and not focusing on what was actually happening in the room, we wouldn't have really bothered to cover it. But because we had really talented people on set, we were like, okay, yeah, we're supposed to do this other stuff, but there's something happening here and it's dramatic and we've got to get that. And it was like, if you don't get it, then when you go in and your executive producer is watching it, they're like, why are you not getting this? So, even in reality, even though there's no time for it, you have to be super quick and be able to read what's going on to be able to catch those moments of when real drama is unfolding in front of you, because real drama always works better than fake drama. And in reality, it's not all real, as we all know. I don't have to tell you that, right? So
it's really non-reality.
No, it's very not real.
Yeah.
Very not real. Well, let's talk a little bit about activism and sort of the future of documentary, because I want to bring that topic in. For you, how did you, did you think about the fact that you were going into something that was a social issue? How much did you have to sort of consider that, and how much were you kind of concerned with your own safety and those kind of issues? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, Dustin Lance Black once told me it's like for writers, you write about what you know, and it's the same with documentary. It's like if there's a social issue, if there's a cause, it doesn't even have to be political. Just do it. You can do it in the art form of documentary. And I just thought it was so important for me to tell this story. And you hear about in the news, just Juarez had and still has a pretty bad rep. And I wanted to show the beauty and the vulnerability of the city through the people that were affected. It's like you don't really hear about the experiences of these people and what they go through. You always, and it pisses me off a little bit because it's the news, 27 people murdered, and that's it. And they don't show the humanity, the reason, the why. I was a little worried, more about the equipment than about myself when I was there.
That's not right.
We have all these cameras and audio equipment. But yeah, I mean, I was really, when I started thinking of the idea, I was like, I have to do it and I have to figure out a way to do it. And I was at a panel yesterday with Phil Palin, and he was saying, I don't care if you have a blog and no one reads it, or if you have a video blog and no one watches it. The important thing is that you're ahead of 80% of the other people who are not doing anything. You're putting content out there. And as a student, you should be doing this, like experimenting, doing your own little short films, documentaries, and screwing up, because this is a time to screw up. And all those mistakes that I made when I was working on my documentary, like, I've learned so much, and I can apply those to the work that I do now, which is why I think I've been able to be very successful in nonfiction in my 3 years in LA, because I was always doing like little documentaries, like I said, also little short ones for the school with nonprofit organizations. And to go back to your question, just write about what you know. Do what's in your heart,
How about for you, Jeff? Can you talk a little bit about where you think maybe documentary is going, and sort of the issue of using, the filmmaking to express and talk about social issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Documentary, I think, is just so ripe for creativity, and most people think, "Oh, that doesn't make sense. It's reality." Sure, fair enough, but I think, my background working on these big blockbuster films and just being really obsessed with, European cinema and French cinema and handheld cinematography, I just, I'm really just inspired by really, like, absolutely fantastic handheld cinematography. I mean, I think the French and the Belgians do it better than anyone. Watch any Dardenne film, and we're not talking about like, the Bourne films. That's not handheld cinematography. Whatever, you can call that whatever you want. But watch any Dardenne brothers film. I can talk about that forever. Anyhow, where I think documentary is going, I just believe that when I watch a film, I want to be emotionally moved. I want to go places. Not fiction, nonfiction, whatever. And I just, when you go into watch a film, to me, it's always going to be about characters. And I always believe that, if you can create a film where social issues bleed out of this character's experience, now we're talking, right? Now we're talking. Not a bunch of people, sitting in front of a camera, static, interview, telling them about their life, like follow that person. And if that person is going through different things in their life, so I have a theory. I have a theory that if I were to follow any one of you for 5 years, in cinema verite, I'm going to bet that there's a really incredible social issue film there. If I followed you, for instance, for 5 years, and all the things that you've gone through in your past 5 years, I'm going to bet you there's a hell of a story there that is universal, that can connect with a large group of people. Anyone, I could point to anyone and go, I bet you have a hell of a story. To me, that's where nonfiction's going. It's just, the best films that I watch are just like films that, allow you into a person's life, and it's all about just generating empathy. That's all it is. That's all we're trying to do. Like, the best art does that. You watch, you look at a painting, you look at a film, and you just go, you know what? I don't live that person's life, but I get that on a really deep level. I really get that. That person's relationship with his father or mother or brother or child, I get that. So that to me is the things that I think very excited about nonfiction.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And we were talking about it in the reality TV panel with Troy DeVold. And it's not about people versus people. It's about people versus situation. I think that's the ingredient, the key. Because if you're thinking about making a documentary yourself, think about what is this person, this character going through? Because it's like, what makes this person interesting? And like he said, I'm sure it's about finding those little seeds that make this person interesting and relatable.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to interject real quick because I totally agree 100%. But I had a conversation last night with another guy who's in the Hall of Fame, and he's telling me this very private thing that's happened in his life in the past few years. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, I can't believe, like, this guy is like incredible, and like he's got this stuff going. And the point I'm trying to make is, you have something going on in your life. He was like, I can pick any one of you and follow you for 5 years, right? And there's a story there. I think everyone feels like, oh, well, that's just me. No one else is going through what I'm going through. And if you're telling a story right, I don't care if it's a documentary, I don't care if it's a reality or a narrative, it doesn't matter. If you're telling a story right, it's going to relate to people because we all go through the same crap.
Yeah.
You know? We might not talk about it, but, you know, you have dad issues, I have dad issues, you know, we have kid problems, there, you know, whatever it is, everyone goes through these things. And if you find a way to tell a story that is honest, then people are going to relate to it because they're going through the same crap.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I think honestly, you could look at the phenomenon of YouTube, and you can see the universality of people's stories, because you look at the YouTube stars of today, and yeah, there's a ton of like people just playing video games, and there's a ton of people teaching you how to braid your hair in 15 different ways, but there's a lot of people talking about their personal lives. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch how documentary evolves in the next 15, 20 years from this generation as they start to mature, and how they perceive documentary and what it means, and sort of that access that they give, because your generation, you guys are the sphere of personal versus public is so much different from us, like the little older generation. Like, we don't post everything. We don't talk about how, you know, it's like we aren't necessarily the generation that does that, but the younger generation, they do. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, I think.
Yeah, sure.
So, you know, talking about sort of personal story, or talking about story and in general, and the process of how you get to that story, can you guys speak a little bit about how the stories that you started out trying, or you planned to tell, ended up changing through the process, through production and the shooting process, and then also in the post-production process? Can you speak a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to talk about that when we were talking about schedules with reality. With whether it's a documentary or a docuseries, you're capturing all these stories, but then you have a plan, a format of how you want to tell this story. But as you start shooting, you figure out, well, maybe we can tell this differently, and then in post-production, your story might be completely different. So it's one of those things where it's obviously important to have a map, a plan. And another thing I was saying yesterday, always the best showrunners that I've worked with, they're cutting in their head when they're shooting. So always when you're shooting, think ahead, like think post. Those are the best showrunners that I've worked with.
Understand coverage, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
and then because it's like you always say, oh, we'll figure it out in post. And I know you've heard this a bazillion times, but no, it's going to take so much more time and money and energy, or it could completely destroy your project. So I think the importance of having that vision of, like I said, cutting in your head when you're shooting. It's invaluable.
And Jeff, you also do your own shooting, correct?
Yes.
For your so I always had this kind of schizophrenic thing that because I as a supervising story producer, I would end up doing a lot of the shooting with the team in the field, but then I would get back in and I would also be overseeing all the editors doing the building of the story. And I can remember the schizophrenic moment where I was like, "Oh my God, who shot this coverage?" And then it was like, "Oh, that was me." Oops.
Yeah.
You can't really get mad at yourself when you're like, do you find that
I think it's if you are working in any form of film, I highly recommend that you edit your own material. As an exercise, do that. Shoot some stuff, right? Get a mount of footage, and just edit. And you will be cursing yourself like she said, who shot this? I'm constantly doing that. I'm not editing my film. I have an absolutely fantastic editor on my project, but I've edited my previous film and other projects. But yeah, it's such a great exercise in filmmaking is the editing process. And when you get things right, oh man, it is just so rewarding. But they're few and far between, so enjoy those moments.
But it's interesting how different from the narrative format documentary, because the creative process, I mean, the post is always a creative process, but I think in documentary it is 100 times more so, because that's where you, especially when you're shooting 400 hours and you're shooting over 3 years, and you can't, you're not going to remember what you shot 3 years ago necessarily, and then you need that time in the post to sort of masticate is a bad word for it, but you have to kind of like chew it up and figure out like what's gonna make the best story. So it's an interesting process.
Yeah, you're asking, starting a project and ending it, how did it change and evolve? Well, for me, when I start something, I'm really driven by my curiosity. I love not knowing stuff. If I'm interested in a person, I find if I meet someone, I find them to be highly interesting, and I'm just curious about their life or their background or whatever. I'll film with that person and intentionally not have them answer the questions that I'm wondering about, verbally. I just want to follow them and see if I can discover things. So I'm constantly just following my own curiosity, and then what you end up when you're curious, like I don't go in saying, this is the film I'm gonna make. I think you're totally losing. That's not the point. That's not what this is about. So you end up shooting a bunch of stuff, and then you kind of go, holy crap! I didn't expect that. That was kind of amazing. I would have never been able to write this moment or this scene. I'm not that good of a writer. Holy crap, and then you end up with this big amount of footage, and the way I end up sifting through it is breaking things up into themes where, if you see these things that are kind of surfacing and that are really interesting, what I'll end up doing is I'll look at the amount of footage and I'll create I'll see a theme, and the material that doesn't fit that theme is gone. That's just it. So I organize by themes, central themes and maybe supporting. Yeah.
Wow. Moving on to something a little bit different, but I want to touch on it before we run out of time. For both of you guys, I'm sensing that for you, because of the financial and the time constraints that you had, I mean, that's why you went to that crazy schedule of just shooting everything in 4 days. How have you dealt with, the financial decisions of what kind of gear you're going to use? How, a lot of those decisions about the things that people don't ever think about with documentaries is that documentary filmmakers, reality, whatever, you're still always thinking about the look, the sound, like you want you want it to have some uniqueness to it. So how have you in the past sort of had to deal with those issues of like picking your gear and picking the look and the feel of your film?
Oh, gear. So I'm as much a gearhead as anyone when it comes to film tools or whatnot. But you'll always hear you end up picking the camera or the gear or the audio gear that works for your film and the style and the scenario. For me, again, like I was really interested in filmmaking because of the image that was coming off this 5D, back in 2000, was it 2009 or 2010? And I knew that I wanted to make a nonfiction film with a cinema camera, because at some point I would love to be able to create a film, put it in front of people, and not have them know or even care eventually if it's fiction or nonfiction. It has to feel like a piece of cinema. It has to move. It has to move you emotionally. So for me, I've shot my film with 2 RED cameras that I own, and that's how I've been able to shoot this film over 3.5 years. Like I would never be able. I had to buy these cameras because I would never be able to rent them because they're like $600, $700, $800 a day, and shooting it over 3.5 years at 140 something shoot days, like that's insane. So it's a major cost. I totally get it. You guys are students. You're like, this guy owns 2 RED cameras, but I just got to the point in my career where I can take these creative risks, these financial risks, drop money on a camera now, because at the end, it's just a piece of art that I'm creating, and that's the constraint that I dived in. I didn't want to. There was no way I was going to shoot this with a video camera. That was totally against, what I was trying to do in nonfiction.
Awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, at this time, we have a few minutes for questions from our audience. So if you have a question for our panelists, please raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. We have, I think, one on either side. For those of you who are joining us online, please direct your questions to our online moderator, who will try to accommodate any questions you have.
First of all, awesome stuff, guys. I'm loving it. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of heartbroken that I can only ask one question.
We can talk after this. Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, my question is, being told several times, by people, instructors, like, don't be biased, don't be biased in your documentary. But I'm having a hard time grasping how can I make
Don't be biased? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, don't be biased.
Like, so, maintain your objectivity while you're shooting? Is that what you mean? Or?
It's more of like, it's hard to explain, but like, don't make it too much of an emotional piece, like something like that. Like, so I'm trying to say is that, like, I'm still trying to grasp.
We've been talking.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we should.
All right, let's talk after this, man.
It's the complete opposite of what we've been talking about.
Oh, my bad.
absolutely.
No, I mean, like, so what am I asking is, like, how do I make a documentary that's more emotional of a piece than a historical piece, Like,
It has to mean something to you.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, you just got to find the story.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And you're talking about bias. I mean, just everyone has bias, but it's just, you just got to be honest in your storytelling.
Yeah, there's no such thing as an objective camera.
Yeah.
It's always subjective.
Absolutely. Because the person operating that, it can't help it. It's just.
How do you make it emotional? Is it how emotionally invested are you in what you're making?
And that might also, maybe it's the idea that you're going in with preconceived notions of what you're going to get. Maybe that's what they're talking about when they say bias. But we'd have to talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
that.
And then real quick, always remember what serves the story. Like I've learned with my experience, sometimes you can't get too attached to the footage. Like you just have to remember it's about flow, moving at a pace that helps your story and serves the story.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's awesome.
Again, guys, if you're into nonfiction, if you're into documentary, there's no separating your relationship as a filmmaker to, like, who's behind the camera, who's in front of the camera. There's no separating. So if you don't want to give you to other people or into your work, this is definitely not. You should not be in this room right now. Like it's very much about like how much are you willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
You're asking for someone to be vulnerable in front of the camera. How vulnerable are you as a filmmaker and as an artist?
And people will
If
read
you don't
that.
want to, if you're an introvert, or you can be an introvert, but if you don't want to give you, this is not for you. Yeah.
So my question is, I know when sometimes we want to make a documentary or to make people aware of a social issue, like for example in Ciudad Juárez, but sometimes social issue can become political really fast. How dangerous was it for you, for example, doing that? Did you ever feel you were in danger? Were you ever threatened for doing a documentary, even though you didn't meant anything bad? How dangerous can it get? Or if it is, I don't know, I'm just curious
great
about
question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously your safety is always number one.
And your crew safety.
Yeah, and I've been saying this in all of these panels, like you can't help others if you don't help yourself first. Like you got to take care of yourself first. But anyway, a lot of people told me, no, don't do it. You're exposing yourself. Why are you going through that risk? Or like, why are you even doing the documentary? No one's going to see it. Like, I'm sure you hear that a lot. Like, why are you bothering making that movie? And here's where passion comes in and enthusiasm. I strongly believed in this story. And I did what I had to do to get it done, which was, my Kickstarter campaign, asking students for help, for equipment. And yeah, sometimes you just got to do it. I also said this at a panel. There's a line from Most Violent Year, the movie, that says, when something feels scary, that's when you jump. So always remember that.
It's great. Love it.
My question's more on the, I guess, logistics side of everything, where documentary films and activist films are obviously everything you're going on is going to be a passion project. I'm more curious to the idea of, I believe you two are married, probably have families. How do you support a family while being in this field, the finance side? How do you convince people to fund your projects, and are there any companies out there that are usually more forgiving and more willing to help out with the documentary side?
Well, I mean, for me, I'm paying my bills by doing corporate work and other stuff, And I think you'll find, and a number of documentary filmmakers that I know all around the country do the same thing. We'll get together and it's like, oh, what are you working on? Oh, I'm doing this, blah, blah, marketing, video, whatever. Like, oh, you're paying the bills. It's just, yep. That's,
Fiction and nonfiction directors, it's the same thing, man. A lot of the great directors that I follow, they're
that's what you do.
I've even heard folks say that they make these feature films, these amazing narratives with these amazing casts, and because they're their own art projects, but they do commercials and documentaries and all that stuff, whatever, to pay the bills. And I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Even Ken Bruce has to raise money. It's like they don't.
Yeah.
He doesn't. He's got to take some years to get projects made because he's got to get the money together. I mean.
But the raising funds for the project, now that's a whole.
How many hours do we have?
Yeah.
It's unbelievably difficult. But as a documentary filmmaker, you find a way to work with what you have. I just finished this film. When we planned it out, our budget was $100,000. We only raised 20, and we did the whole thing for 14. Like, you just do it, Yeah,
and it goes back to story. There's a documentary about the Russian artists, Pussy Riot, who were incarcerated for expressing their arts against the government. And most of the documentary was shot in an iPhone, or some of the technical elements were not on point. But at the end of the day, it's all about story. Sometimes you see videos on Instagram or on social media, and they're shot with phones or not the highest gear.
Yeah.
But it's all about the story. If it's a compelling, something that catches your attention, that's all that matters.
Yeah, and films are funded just a wide variety of ways. I mean, really. And there are ways of self-funding, and we're finding funding through grants and whatnot. There are pitch forums. If you've got an amazing story so there are a lot of places that you can go that have their pitch forums. You can go in front of like a panel of industry delegates that are full of distributors and whatnot, and if they believe in your film and also believe in you, right? It's the film that you're creating and who the heck is making this thing. That's the package, right? It's not just about your film. It's not just about you. If you're an amazing person with a lot of great ideas, but your reel or your trailer for your work sucks, there's no other way of saying it. Like, you're not going to get funding. It's got to be a 1-2 punch.
It also helps if like your first projects are close to home, so that you're not having to travel. The traveling is what kills you. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've looked into doing these great story ideas, and I've had to nix them because they were across the country, and there was no way I was going to get all the time to go, and family and everything else. And so you just have to sometimes, try with those first projects to pick what's close to home.
Right. Yeah, and also when it comes to budgets, to me, money in film is just an artistic tool. If I had $100,000, I could make something. If I had, $60 million, I can make something. They would be different films. If you had $2,000, you could make something. It's just most likely going to be a different film. But
that's great.
It's no excuse, is what I'm saying. No excuse. Go make something, share it, get a lot of feedback, have your own little group of filmmaking friends that you share with before you share it out wide. I always suggest finding your core group, finding your team now, people that you really trust to get feedback from, that give you very, very good feedback and get feedback often. And then once you get a lot of great feedback from your small little concentric circle, then grow that circle with a handful of other folks and show your work, and more and more and more, and then you can share it out wide. So always getting feedback. Don't be so sensitive. We're all, sensitive little butterfly, whatever. Just keep, part of the process of growing as an artist, and from my experience, is just really being very, very good at getting feedback and receiving it, and just saying, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" Okay, thank you very much. When people stop giving you feedback, that's when you should worry. Yeah. Because they don't care about you, because you don't take feedback probably very well. But when people give you feedback, that means they care about you. So.
It's a great comment.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I have another logistics question. What are some early telltale red flags that a production or the story you're trying to go with is just not going to work out?
Frank? Frank knows all about... No, I'm just...
I know all about failure. I'm trying to think of a project that I was on that may have happened, so I can give you like a real example. And the problem is I've been potentially involved in so many that never happened or got started and failed for one reason or another that I can't. I'm trying to think of something actually knowledgeable and helpful. How do you, a red flag? I don't know. It really depends on what you're trying to tell and where you are and what sort of finances you have and who you're working with. There's so many variables that there can be red flags, as in like you have this guy who's going to come shoot for you and he doesn't show up. Well, obviously, or he's late. You don't want to work with that guy. Or there could be, oh yeah, we're going to give you X amount of money for your thing, and then they're like, well, you know what? Okay, well that could be right. There's so many different things that could be stumbling blocks, right? But none of that really matters, because no one is going to stop you from doing what you're going to be doing except for you. So if this hurdle comes up, you just go over it. If this wall is put in front of you, you find a way around it or over it or whatever, and you make it happen. Like, if you're going to tell a story that you're passionate about, why would any of that matter? Why would you might have a red flag. Okay, that red flag is just going, okay, don't go that direction. Go this direction. You find a way to get it done.
I would add. I would also add, like, if it's not speaking to you, like if you're doing interviews,
That's the biggest red flag.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's not
Yes.
speaking to you and you're like, God, I don't even want to watch this. Like, I don't even want to be here interviewing this person, or I don't even want to be like shooting this because I don't, it's like, if it's, you have to trust, you have to listen to that inner, I think Jeff said it really, really well earlier. It's like, you have to listen to that inner voice. And then you do what Frank says. Okay, it's not working here, now I got to move it. And that's where that flexibility comes in, where you have to shift it and you have to find the story. Then that's part of that flexibility you have to have in documentaries. You have to be able to get past sort of what you thought you're going to achieve and what you set out to do and what you end up getting. Because you could set out to make a really important social story about autism or something and end up realizing that the real story is over here. And if you're so stuck on doing that one story that you can't see that the real story is over here, then you're going to be selling yourself short.
And I'll add that you will find difficulties like that on every single project you ever work on.
Yeah. It's
And
true.
every single day you're on.
Yeah.
Yep. Every single time. There will never be one that you don't have an issue like that.
And sometimes it's just a matter of timing. Like, I've interviewed people and it just wasn't working that day. You know what I mean? It's just that day. They're having an off day, or they just, whatever.
Oh, scheduling.
Yeah.
Scheduling nonfiction is
Headache. City.
Again, they're not actors, right? Like they don't have a trailer out back and hey, call them in, all right, let's go shoot. No, man, they have lives, right? Everyone's busy. Red flag. Totally. It really always ends up coming back to you as a filmmaker. How invested are you in this financially, emotionally, mentally, all these things? I mean, kind of the other red flag I was talking about was if you feel like you're filming with someone and they're really guarded, and you can't break that guard, or they simply don't want to offer that, kind of themselves to the project. There have been many times where I was filming with folks, and they would tell you, "Oh, I'm into this. This sounds great. Yeah, count me in. Okay, great. How about Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday? Which day is good to film? I'll meet you at this time. Okay. Oh no, not Wednesday, or not Thursday, or not Friday. You start recognizing that very quickly.
Yeah.
That, to me, that's a red flag immediately.
Yeah.
Is if I try to schedule someone a number of times and they're kind of blowing me off, then I go, life is too short, man.
Yeah.
Life is too short. That's a really quick red flag for me, is you say you want in, but you're simply not wanting to schedule stuff.
And if you're doing nature documentaries, just be ready to wait really long amounts of time
Oh, yeah.
to get anything usable.
Animals don't take direction very well.
No, they don't.
You can try, but other than
Children.
dogs and once in a while a cat.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question from our online audience. Kiana McDowell, who's a film student, wants to know, what part of shooting documentaries do you find the most challenging, along with what you were talking about?
Everything. Most challenging, I think honestly it's probably scheduling. I mean, again, they're non-actors, so you really have to work around people's schedules, and of course you have a schedule, and then it just that's why a lot of times documentaries just take a long time. Simply it's because your subjects are living their life. You're living your life, and you're trying to put pennies together to keep this project happening. Most challenging, holy cow, where do you start? If you want to-
Patience. Patience.
Oh yeah.
Man, just having the patience to not rush the story, not rush the people.
Yeah, and just having an open mind, because sometimes you're in these different worlds, you're out of your comfort zone. You might be shooting a project in a completely different country or city, so you have to be open to, and you got to remember you're in their space, so you have to be, just open-minded and, like I said, empathy and relate to their situation.
It's great, yeah.
Challenging. Oh, God.
Hey guys.
So challenging.
Just wanted to say thanks for hanging out with us at 9 a.m.
Thanks for
My
being here.
question is sort of around the funding question as well.
Yep.
Jeff, like you mentioned, you spent 400 hours on your project. When you're sort of out in the field, doing your story,
Yeah.
what are some ways that you guys might continue to fund yourself? Like, for example, if I'm working a part-time job and I have this creative idea and I'm trying to film it on the side, if I'm out on the road in the field, for example, what are some ways to sort of collect like a bankroll to live off of?
Yeah, funding a film has been hard ever since the dawn of filmmaking, and it's not getting any easier. I mean, there's a lot of, I just found is if you have a really great story on your hands and you're capturing it in a way that is, really showing that you can make this film and you can tell a story and you're getting great coverage and whatnot. I think a lot of it is, it always ends up coming back to just doing your research on who's funding films. What I would end up doing, before I started, I had zero idea, how you fund a film. So I started watching films that I thought were, pretty good on Netflix or whatever, and I would watch the credits and I would see who the hell's funding these films. Like, oh man, that was a really amazing nonfiction film. So I would just start watching people's credits, Netflix, over and over and over, writing them down. So I ended up having like a spreadsheet of people that I had no idea who these folks were, who these companies were. I ended up having a spreadsheet of like, 40 or 50 different companies that had the little logos at the end. And I just went, who are these guys? Okay, I know who Sundance Institute is. I know who these folks are, but who's Chicken and Egg? What do they do? Oh, they film films that are, that have central female or women characters. Okay, well maybe that doesn't work for me, but I don't know. So basically, what I'm saying is, it's ever evolving, it's ever changing. Do your research, it's all there. It's right on Netflix. Just watch the credits and put it together, and then find the dates on when these institutes, have grants open up, and apply for those grants. For me, when I funded this thing, the job was, it'd be great to get a film grant. They're hard. One grant is hard to get. So the job that I had was, okay, I'm going to apply for 20 grants to make this film. It's a numbers game, right? Like, I'm an ex-baseball player, so it's all about numbers. So apply for 20. If I get 1 out of 20 film grants, that's a big success. That's awesome, right? If I go 0 for 20, I'm going to bet by the end of that exercise, I'm going to have a better film because it's forced me to sit in front of the material, write it out, and articulate exactly what I'm trying to make. So it's a win-win, man. It's a numbers game. Do your research. It's all there.
And also, real quick, if you're super independent, kind of like the way that I was making my documentary, try to, let's say you're interviewing someone in whatever city, in Miami, for example. Find like a restaurant that's near the person you're interviewing and reach out to the restaurant and say, hey, could I do my interview here and could you feed my crew? And you're saving money and food, and just offer something in exchange, like, oh, I'll do an establishing shot of your restaurant and I'll show it in the documentary real quick. This is where the interview's happening. Totally. Just little things, just be creative, like how little ways in which you can save money. And because little things add up, like lunch or gas.
Absolutely.
Find a buddy that is willing to drive your crew and you can credit them as a driver or as a PA, or just being creative with those little things, because the little things are the ones that add up.
Crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Great. All that's available now.
And that goes along with what I was going to say. And as you continue on, you're going to develop all these relationships. Mm-hmm. And so you're talking about funding. Well, you're going to develop relationships with people who may be successful or may have money and may be willing to do it and put the risk in, but if you're going to do something like that, private funding, friend, family funding, just make sure that they understand up front that you might not get this back. You know what I mean? So.
Make that really clear that they're never going to ever see a penny from anything.
Yeah.
That's just a good general filmmaking knowledge. Like, don't ever promise anybody.
Yeah, and do your homework. Do your homework. It's all there. If you want to find funding, find out who's funding films.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions?
So,
See? Oh.
All right. Hi, guys.
Hi.
I want to know, we talk about a lot about passion and the hard work that it takes to do documentaries. And I want to know how was the transitions for you guys finishing here in Fuso and taking the decision of, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be in documentary. How was that transition? I know, Ricardo, you started already here, but I know Frank and Jeff. How was that transition of taking that decision of doing it? What will be your recommendation of finishing Fuso and the life after Fuso, being a documentary guy? And then my second question, and if it's possible, will be, we talk a lot about the funding and the process of doing it, the documentary, but what happened after when we already have that documentary? Because I just finished mine 5 months ago, and I really don't know what to do with it, right? So what will be your recommendation and what to do after?
You need to get it out there. I mean,
Share it.
Share it, yeah.
Get feedback.
You made it to tell a story to somebody. If you don't put it in front of somebody, no one's going to hear the story, right? So you're telling a story to yourself right now if you don't share it. So you need to put it out. But Vimeo, YouTube, whatever, Twitter, I don't know. I guess you can't do it Twitter.
Yeah, find film festivals. There's so many film festivals that are very niche, very specific to what you're talking about. If it's an animal rights documentary, you'd be surprised how many animal rights little festivals are out there. Or just talk to a course director to have a little screening for students. Just reserve a space in the auditorium, show it to students, put it on Twitter, get feedback, invite teachers, and start, like I said, be creative, little ways in which you can share it with everyone. Like I was telling him about the money, just think of the sources you have right now. You have amazing sound systems, amazing projectors. Take advantage of all of that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Does everyone know what Without a Box is? Yeah, everyone is familiar with that. Yeah, there's so many film festivals, and part of some of those film festivals, some of those film festivals are part of a film institute. And some of those film institutes offer grants. So look at that big long list. Go through Without a Box. Look at all these film festivals. Write them all down. Film festivals that you feel like would connect with what you're making. There might be film institutes attached to film festivals as well.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit about the schedule and that it can change because it depends on the interviewee because they are not talent. I don't know. But what's kind of like the best way to schedule to plan your schedule, like really organized to get like a great story from the interviewee, and at the end don't miss kind of like a piece, because it's pretty different from documentaries on film or TV shows or narrative documentaries. But what kind of like the best way to plan and keep it like organized, so at the end you have post-production and kind of like an easier job for your editor.
So scheduling and also organizing in post, is that?
No. Like at the end you get like a great piece and you don't have like to struggle in post because you didn't miss any story.
Well, if you have that's a lot to answer there. My first thought is, if you've shot an amount of material and you have your story completely by the time you start editing, man, kudos to you.
Yeah.
Good on you. You're amazing. A lot of times the editing process has already happened and you think you have everything, and then you realize like, oh man, I didn't get coverage on this and I didn't get establishing shots here. We need score right here in this part of the film, and we need just imagery that whatever it needs to be filled in, but I don't have it. So, I think, once you get to the editing process, you know, you could be very, I don't know, I'm not so precious on chronological order. To me, I'm just trying to tell a story. So a lot of times things shift. But yeah, I don't know many people that start the editing process with all the material that they have. I mean, that'd be amazing. But so yeah, you keep shooting while you're editing. It's brutal. But what was the other part of your question? Like, how do you schedule? Yeah, schedule often, and assume that it's gonna fail.
It's all gonna change.
So you know, honestly, okay. You know what I do? This is what I do. I quit scheduling, and what I mean by that is I just show up. No shit. Sorry.
I've never heard that
I just show up. I'm there. I quit scheduling. I'm just always freaking there. So, and what that says is, that says a lot about your commitment to the project. And your subject would be like, oh God, this guy's here again. Man, and then the more and more that you're there, the more they go, you know what, I owe it to this guy. He's always here. He has a family. This guy really cares about this thing. I'm gonna give him more. You know, by you giving more, you end up getting more back. So I really did quit scheduling. I just started showing up all the time.
Apparently guilt works. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think we have a question online.
Okay, and the last question online is from Keisha Cumberbach, 2016 creative writing graduate. How difficult is it for you to select the final material you're going to use in your documentary?
Oh, it's so easy.
Final?
Final? Yeah, final. Oh, man.
Is it ever final?
It's really difficult. A lot of times, Ricardo was saying, you know, he shot for a handful of days and was editing for a year. That's, you know, the struggle is real in post, you know. Because, you know, the thing is, you know, you have this amount of footage and you need to make sense of it. And, you know, you need to be able to tell a story. Stories being, you know, like even the thought of having a documentary follow a 3-act structure, a lot of people just kind of scoff at that, but really it's just the fundamentals of storytelling. You know, once upon a time everything was all fine, and then holy crap, this thing happened. How am I gonna fix my life at this point? And then the resolve, right? Like beginning stories are all beginning, middle, and end. Period. You know, we're around campfires, making sounds at each other, telling each other stories, and there's a beginning and there's a middle and there's an end, just like in nonfiction. Yeah, so a lot of times, you know, you just are trying to make sense of what your mounted footage is. So yeah, super hard. Work with the best editor or editors that you can find. Find your editor right now. They might be in this room, and work with this person.
But like all filmmaking, it's done when you can no longer look at it. When you are just, I cannot look at it anymore. And that was 6 months ago. Then the film is done. I mean, all filmmaking, you can just keep going. You can just keep tweaking.
You think
it's no
done,
different.
and then a year later,
right? Come back,
you're
and
still
then
working on it.
Yeah.
You need to find, when you get to the point where you believe in it and you find somebody that you trust that is experienced to watch it and give you honest feedback. And then you might be like, oh, I didn't think about that. And then, you know, like with my film, that's exactly what we did. You know, I had this friend, her name is Annie, and she's an amazing writer. And I said, hey, I know you don't give a crap about skateboarding or punk rock, but can you watch this? And she was like, oh my gosh, there's such a great story here, but boom, 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 boom. And we restructured the entire film. You know, it's just, you need honest feedback. And you're talking about, the question was regarding choosing final shots or whatever. I think that just goes along with everything. You know, not really choosing a final shot, but it all comes together, and that's what you need to worry about, not like this shot or that shot. It's how does it propagate the story, you know?
It's a temporal art, you know? I mean, Yeah, no, it takes a lot of time. And I'm going to drop a gem, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Documentary editor, they're the only ones making money in this field. So if you want to edit and you love it, keep editing. You can have a very, very constant and solid career if you're very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
Documentary editors a lot of times make more money than the director and the producer. Mic drop.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Awesome.
the same in reality. Like editors make more than story producers.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They also spend the most time in post.
That's true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for attending today, and especially thank our guests, Ricardo, Frank, and Jeff. Thank you so much for all your valuable information. Have a great day.